Welcome to the Transformation Leaders Podcast. I'm Tony Lockwood and I'm delighted that you could join me on this latest episode. Each episode takes the form of a discussion with a leader who openly shares their experiences of leading organisations through the transformation journey. My guest today is Phil Johnson, founder and CEO of the Master of Business Leadership Programme, a programme focused upon developing emotional intelligence, inspirational leadership and higher consciousness to build career, personal and corporate success. He is the author of 6 books, and I'm delighted that he has agreed to come and share his wisdom with us today. So let me introduce you to Phil now. Well, good morning, Phil. Thank you very much for joining us this morning on the latest Transformation Leaders podcast. I'm delighted that you can join us.
Tony, thank you. It's a pleasure to be on your show.
Brilliant, thank you. I'm really looking forward to exploring your experience in a little bit more detail, and specifically on your perspective around your experience in the world of emotional intelligence, and how you see it as being an essential element of any successful transformation. But before we start getting into the detail, let's sort of step back and if you can introduce yourself and tell the listeners a little bit about you and your background, and I suppose how you first moved into the world of change and transformation.
Sure. Let me start out with your last question first. I was born with dyslexia, and that forced me out of my comfort zone at a very early age, well, from birth. Early years of grade school were extremely difficult. By the way, back in those days, there was no such thing as dyslexia or ADD or ADHD. So I didn't actually realize that I am dyslexic until about 35 years ago.
Wow.
But I'll tell you, I really consider it now a gift, because it forced me to do a lot of what I refer to as emotional labor that helped me to prepare for the work I've been doing for the last 22 years.
Yeah.
So I'm an executive coach. I've been working with executives and organizations all over the world to help them achieve better results by developing their leadership and emotional intelligence with a program I created called the Master of Business Leadership.
Mm-hmm. And before that, what were looking back on your background, you had 20 odd years working in the semiconductor background, or semiconductor industry, should I say?
Yeah, I spent 20 years in the semiconductor industry. I finished my career in that industry as an executive, traveling about 60,000 miles per year throughout North America and the Pacific Rim. But my passion has always been what I do now, in helping executives and organizations.
Okay, well, I'm sure we'll get into more detail about that and how you sort of made that transition in a while. But we always start this podcast with one standard question. How do you define transformation from the organization perspective?
Well, an organization is simply a group of individuals that have agreed to come together for a common purpose, to serve the marketplace with some type of product or service or combination. But you can't have organizational change without individual change first.
Yeah.
So there's a methodology for individual change, and there's a methodology for organizational change, but the individual change has to come first.
Okay, no, that's totally agree with that. I think we spoke earlier about the need for taking people on that journey, and if you don't, then there's the major risk to the successful outcome of whatever it is that you're trying to transform. So totally agree with that. Just going back to that transition from career in semiconductor to moving into self-employment and coach,
some people would say that's a big decision. So just tell me a little bit more about that your perspective at that time, and you said earlier that you felt that it was your natural sort of
Yeah,
transition. Be good just to get a little bit of sense around what you were thinking at the time.
that's a great question. Thanks for asking it. Uh, I've known since the early 1980s that this is my passion. This is what living and working on purpose means for me. I actually had people come up to me suggesting that I do this kind of work um, about 20 years before I actually had the courage to take the leap of faith
Right.
of leaving my corporate career to doing what I'm doing now. I I actually interesting story. I made the decision, uh, um, and I was driving into work one morning in the summer. I remember it was a beautiful sunny day, and I said, if I'm ever going to do this, um, I've got to take the leap of faith and start. So I actually called my wife up um, and told her what I was going to do, and she was very supportive. And I drove into the office and I handed in my resignation. Um, and I didn't have any clients at the time,
Right.
and I actually started with a $20,000 line of credit. Um, so I left a very successful corporate career to take the leap of faith. Now I've generated several $1 million since then,
Yeah.
but it really required me to take that leap of faith. And I really don't necessarily recommend that approach for anybody, but it's really a path that I've been on for about 55 years. And it was a decision I didn't make lightly, and it didn't happen overnight, but it did require me to have the courage to take that leap of faith.
Yeah. So, in terms of your career within the semiconductor, and you were saying you were doing a lot of what you now help other organizations to embed around sort of emotional intelligence and that link to leadership. What were the key things that you were seeing within your career that made you realize actually you're looking at things in a slightly different way to what the norm is, and actually a lot of what your ways of working, your ways of thinking, there's an opportunity there to help others to deliver greater success in personal life and in organizational life?
Yeah, another great question. A tremendous amount of toxicity, drama, chaos, conflict, disengagement, lack of trust, lack of awareness.
Mm-hmm.
Um, it's a it was a huge problem, and it's an even greater problem today because of the accelerating rate of global change.
Yeah.
The current level of employee engagement worldwide, according to Gallup, is around 13%. Low levels of employee engagement are costing the U.S. economy alone over $1 trillion a year. And it's also why over 80% of all mergers and acquisitions and employee engagement initiatives fail.
Yeah.
So there's an incredible and growing need for the development of our emotional intelligence to be able to face the challenges we're facing now and are going to face, and look for the opportunities in those challenges. We're facing a tsunami of accelerating change, excuse me, with a 500 million year old brain that doesn't like change. There was a study done at UC Berkeley over 40 years comparing intellectual intelligence with emotional intelligence, and they concluded that emotional intelligence was 400% more valuable than intellectual intelligence in determining career, personal, and corporate success. So the lack of emotional intelligence represents a huge gap in our development, and that we need now more than ever.
And just talk me through your thinking around emotional intelligence, how you define emotional intelligence. What are the key elements of that are evident, and in some cases not evident, with some leaders that you've been working with?
Yeah, emotional intelligence, very simply, is the ability to feel the fear and anxiety that change and innovation always triggers in us, and be able to acknowledge it and move through it towards uh, moving towards the vision of our desired results, as opposed to allowing that fear and anxiety to keep us trapped in our comfort zones.
Mm.
So it's really the journey of moving towards something you have a strong emotional connection to, that develops emotional intelligence, inspirational leadership, higher consciousness of what's going on in us and around us, which actually creates greater freedom from our ego-based fear and leads to higher levels of trust and engagement. And that guarantees career, corporate, and personal success.
Mm.
And I've been proving that in my coaching practice all over the world for the last 22 years.
Right. And there's one thing, having that emotional intelligence and understanding that from a personal perspective. But I think real leadership comes in when you take that knowledge and understanding of what it means to you, and then look to work with your team and your people with that, through that lens and through that with that mindset, because everyone's going through the same process in their own head, and working through how to help them and support them through that change journey.
Yeah. Emotional intelligence, the development of emotional intelligence, is an experiential process. It's not an intellectual process. And by that, I mean you can't develop emotional intelligence, or for that matter, leadership, by reading a book or having a conversation or watching a video. Those are intellectual processes. The development of emotional intelligence is an experiential process. And quite frankly, our educational employment systems have failed us, because they focus primarily on our ability to do intellectual labor, and they've done little or nothing to develop our emotional intelligence.
So do you think that's raises an interesting question, though, around sort of nature nurture, and from my experience, I think there are people that are much more emotionally intelligent naturally. They're much more what's the word, comfortable with being with people, engaging with people, not necessarily extroverts, but more sort of, as you say, naturally engaging people than others. And whether that is nature or whether that is nurture is an interesting question.
It's not nature. It's not nature. It's nurture. The only way people develop the capability you're suggesting, or you're talking about, is based on how they handle fear.
Mm-hmm.
And the thing that they all have in common is that they have some desired result that motivates them to leave their comfort zone in the pursuit of that desired result, and move through the fear and anxiety that occurs in them when they leave their comfort zone. And that journey, that process, is what gives them the insights into themselves and other people, that we are drawn to, that we see in them. But it didn't happen from birth. It happened through an experiential process of moving through their fear, as opposed to being controlled by it.
No, it's a good point, and a point I'd not really thought about previously. So no, totally agree. So In terms of your experience working with leaders across different sectors, different geographies, what are the key elements that you think that you observe repeatedly that are stopping them from being good leaders and driving change and within their organizations? What are the key things that you keep seeing?
One thing, ego-based fear.
Right.
Ego-based fear.
And what do you mean by ego-based fear? Just explain that a little bit more.
Yeah, we're only actually conscious about 3 to 5% of the time. The rest of the time, we're relying on our habits to determine our behaviors and our results. That's fine. But our ego never wants us to be in the present moment. Our ego wants us to feel superior or inferior to others, but it never wants us to feel equal. So the fear that's created in us by our egos is what blinds us to what's going on in us and around us. And it's constant. For hundreds of millions of years, there's a part of our old lizard brain called the amygdala that's been trying to keep us safe and alive by making sure we never leave the safety of our cave or our comfort zone. So if we do, it automatically triggers the release of a hormone called cortisol into our bloodstream. And that causes the executive center of our brain, our prefrontal cortex, to shut off. And we go into what psychologists refer to as an amygdala hijack. Excuse me, some people lash out, some people run away, some people freeze like a deer in the headlights. And it causes us to often say and do things we later regret. When that happens in conflict situations, people die. When it happens in business or personal situations, relationships die. We burn trust. So as an analogy, if you think of your amygdala as a very frightened 4-year-old child, the development of our emotional intelligence acts like a big brother or a big sister to quiet the amygdala response down and better enable us to feel the fear and anxiety that changing innovation always triggers in us and be able to move through it towards what it is we're trying to achieve, as opposed to allowing that fear and anxiety to control us. So unless you have an emotional connection to something you want to achieve that's greater than your fear, you may want better results than you're currently getting, but you're not going to be willing to do the emotional labor that getting better results requires. And quite frankly, most people don't. And so if they're not willing to change themselves, the only alternative they have is to try and use some position-based power to control, manipulate others to get them to change. And that's why we experience such a high level of toxicity and disengagement amongst individuals and organizations. It's really driven by ego-based fear.
Interesting. So when you are engaged with organizations and individual leaders, I suspect, that have experienced that toxicity within their organization, what are the sort of core elements and what are the key things that you look to? What do you do? What do you look to change, and how do you go about doing that? What are the key lessons?
Yep. The first thing I ask them is, what do you want? Because people don't do what they need to do, they do what they want to do. And when somebody tells you what they want, they're also telling you what they don't have. And the bigger the gap between where they are versus where they want to be, the more motivated they are to look for a solution to close that gap. And without that motivation, they simply won't have the willingness to do the challenging emotional labor that change and better results requires.
And do you find, just on that, do you find that people naturally know what they want, or is that is that something that you've got to prize out of them and through the questions?
Yeah, that's a great question. They may know what they want on a surface level.
Yeah.
Hey, I want to advance in my career, or I want to generate more revenue, or I want to I want better results in my personal life or something. But what they get in the MBL program along with that is so much more. But what they want initially evolves as they go through the program.
Mm.
And their actually motivation changes from a motivation based on pain or wanting to get away from something to a motivation based on passion, wanting to move towards a desired result.
Mm.
But what they want evolves as they become more conscious of what's going on in them and around them.
Right. Yeah, I think that sort of we're talking about this a little bit in a previous episode, but it was around that sort of really helping someone to understand what their passions are and what their passion is, should I say? And you'll get an initial response when you ask them what they want, but it's then peeling back the onion layers really, and by asking why and why is that important, and getting down to the real core element of
Can I make a comment on that? And you're absolutely correct. And this relates to the fundamental core concept, which involves energy physics. So let me just rant about this for a couple of minutes. When we're born, we're not born with a conscious mind. We are born with an unconscious mind, but we immediately we don't start to become conscious until we're about a year or so old. And we immediately start wiring up our brain, creating the neural network pathways in our brain that become our habits in order to survive. And a lot of those habits unconsciously cause us to give away our energy. And we do it in lots of different ways. How we communicate, listen, take responsibility, make decisions, all sorts of ways. But when we unconsciously are giving away our energy over here, it creates an energy deficit in us. So at the same time we're giving away our energy, we have to be replacing that energy by trying to steal energy from other people over here. And that dynamic is going on inside of everybody, everywhere, all over the world, all the time.
Mm-hmm.
And that is the root cause of all drama, chaos, conflict, war we see everywhere. So what I do in the MBL program is I show people how they're unconsciously giving away their energy, and I give them better habits to practice to stop doing that. And when they stop giving away their energy, their need to steal the energy of other people goes away because they don't need it. And it's in that process that you develop your emotional intelligence, you become a more inspirational leader, you raise your level of consciousness about what's going on in you and around you, which leads to higher levels of engagement and better results.
And I suspect the starting point of that is helping them to identify where they are, allowing their energies to be taken by others.
Yeah. The starting point is helping them to connect emotionally with something they want to achieve that motivates them to leave their comfort zone in order to achieve it. Because without that motivation, it's like putting fuel in your car. Without any fuel, you're not going anywhere. So without that emotional connection to a desired result that's stronger than your fear, you're not going to change. You may want better results than you're currently getting, but you're not going to be willing to move out of your comfort zone and create those new habits that are going to enable you to get those better results.
Right, interesting. And sort of taking it back into the world of change and transformation, organizational change and transformation, which is the sort of core element of this podcast series. Those individuals that you working with, you are working with, should I say, are leaders within organizations. They may well be leading significant change programs. I can absolutely understand the process that you've gone through with them as individuals. How do you then help them to translate that knowledge and that experience into helping others within their organizations to go through that same journey?
Yeah. that gets into the methodology for organizational change.
Yeah.
Think of an organization as a big pool of energy. The more people you, as an analogy, think of an organization made up of three types of people: sheepdogs, sheep, and wolves.
Yeah.
And the wolves often use some type of position-based power to feed off of the sheep.
Yeah.
And the sheepdogs protect the sheep and battle the wolves. The more sheepdogs you develop within an organization, the less drama, chaos, and conflict there is in the organization. So as you develop more and more sheepdogs, the negativity, the drama, chaos, and conflict within the organization becomes less and less.
Yeah.
And so the organization can heal itself from the inside out by developing the leadership and the emotional intelligence of people in it. And typically, once about 20% of the people are learning to stop giving away their energy, it takes on a momentum within the organization because of the behavior and better results they're creating. And other people start to move on board, to move in that direction. And then the folks that are having the most difficulty with change end up leaving the organization for a more chaotic environment.
It's interesting, isn't it? And like we use same different analogy, but the same principles. It's identify those people that are detractors, identify those people that can be converted to be the change agents, yeah. And then the majority will then start to flow with the change agents. The change agents are your sheepdogs, your detractors, the wolves, and the bulk of the people are sheep. But it's getting the change agents engaged early doors. And what I found is that if you can identify those wolves early on, you can convert those, and they become the biggest supporters and the biggest change agents moving forward. They can become.
A couple of comments. The wolves are going to be the last to change, because the wolves, by definition, are often as perceived as the successes within the organization. Mm-hmm. So they typically have the least amount of motivation to change. The other point I want to make is it's important not to ignore victim behavior. It's important not to deal with it, because if you ignore it, if it doesn't go away, it'll metastasize within the organization, much like a cancer, and end up killing the organization. So it needs to be acknowledged and dealt with, and not ignored.
Absolutely. And all too often, I find that people go down the route of least resistance. So they do ignore it, and as you say, it grows and grows and grows, and comes back and bites you on the bum very, very quickly.
And so that's
painfully.
That's why we have such a low level of employee and customer engagement. That ignoring is really costing trillions of dollars a year. It's costing organizations trillions of dollars a year, and it's really affecting both top and bottom line results. And the reason, well, that's another discussion, but the point is that because of the accelerating rate of global change, if we continue to ignore it, it's going to get much worse. And the cost of ignoring it is going to become much greater. So we're really kind of at a tipping point where we're being forced to evolve, to become more conscious, and to learn to stop giving into our ego-based fears and that cause us to give away our energy.
So if there's one thing that you could leave us with as a thought process or a trigger to get people to do more research and maybe contact you to sort of develop the knowledge of the MBL program that you run. What's that one thing that you think is the key trigger point for people to really sort of engage with that whole process of moving away from ego-based decision making?
Yeah. Throughout the balance of this century, we're going to be facing accelerating rates of global change, which is going to necessitate the development of our emotional intelligence to be able to turn those changes into opportunities for better results. And I encourage everybody to invest in themselves, invest in relationships with themselves, other people, and the planet around them. The ROI is incredible.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Well, thanks a lot, Phil. That was really insightful. What we'll do, we'll put on the show notes links to your website and details.
Yeah, I'll give you a link to my Zoom calendar. If anybody wants to reach out to me and continue the conversation, I'd be happy to. And I also want to thank you for your leadership in the emotional intelligence in doing what you do. It's really an honor to be part of the work you're doing.
Brilliant. Well, thank you very much, Phil. Phil, thank you so much for joining me today. If you're interested in learning more about the Master of Business Leadership program, or indeed continuing the discussion with Phil, please use the link in the show notes to arrange a call with him. The Transformation Leaders Hub community offers a variety of benefits for individuals looking to develop their leadership skills and drive positive change in their organisations and communities. Here are some of the main benefits of joining. Number 1, access to exclusive content. As a member, you'll have access to a wealth of resources, including exclusive content, expert-led workshops, webinars, and more. 2, professional development. Our community is designed to support your personal and professional growth, offering opportunities to learn new skills, gain valuable insights, and connect with like-minded individuals. Number 3, networking opportunities. Connect with other change and transformation leaders from a diverse range of industries and backgrounds and build relationships that can help you drive positive change in your organisation or community. Number 4, a supportive community. Our community is welcoming and supportive space for individuals to share their experiences, exchange ideas, and learn from one another. And finally, inspiration and motivation. Interact with other change and transformation leaders, share your experience, and draw inspiration and motivation from the successes and challenges of others. By joining the Transformation Leaders Hub community, you'll have access to all of those benefits and more. You'll be part of a community that is dedicated to driving positive change and then transforming the world through effective leadership. Sign up today. So with that, thank you for joining us today on this podcast. I'll see you very soon. Bye for now.